I'm with Paul Weaver here in the beautiful Garden Tomb, and we're talking about three extraordinary ladies. Tell us about these ladies, Paul.
Yes, these ladies really were very primarily responsible for the part of the discovery and also the bringing about of the purchase of the Garden Tomb all those years ago, 120 years ago. And the three ladies, the interesting thing about them was the different things that they did in partnership to bring this about. The garden basically was owned by a Greek ownership, and it was where the tomb was discovered that linked into Calvary, General Gordon's discovery there of Golgotha. And so these ladies with men, but these women particularly, were working to maneuver the possibility of purchasing the land. And so the first lady that we have is a lady called Lucia Hope. And she was from a very well-to-do family in the UK. And she had a love for Israel. And she wanted to see this land purchased. So she was one of the first people to work with clergy and people in Great Britain to try and bring about the purchase. She was also the one who set up the first trustee board, and that was all very important in charity status. Then there was another lady who was just as important, and her name was Charlotte Hussey, and she actually lived in Jerusalem for 1 year while these negotiations were going on. And she worked a little bit on the excavation of the tomb itself and was really the representative in Jerusalem for this transaction of purchasing of the land. And then there was another lady, her name was Joanna Beckholt, and she was a Dutch lady, and she was working the finance. And so you've got three ladies here working with men, but very significant in terms of bringing about the purchase of the land, the handing it over to a trust, and the possibility of this lovely garden being held for posterity in the future. And so they worked together, and finally when the document was signed for purchase, it was Lucia Hope's signature that is on there, together with Evan Hopkins, who was one of the gentlemen that was working also with the journey to try and purchase this land. And so this garden, really, the rediscovery of it was very much to do, or had a big influence from three ladies. And today we're being blessed with over 250,000 people coming through the garden. And I've often wondered what those ladies would have thought if they could know what was happening now when it started in such an embryonic way all those years ago. But it was faith and hope and strength and tenacity that brought about the possibility of purchase.
How much did it cost to purchase this place, and did they have to set up a trust and raise the money?
Yes, what they had to do, first of all, I think they paid about £1,000 or so, which of course today would be maybe moving on to 200,000 or something like that, I think, in terms of today's money. Yes, they had to set up a trust in the UK that had to be verified by the government as a charity, and still is today. And so the charity number that we carry here in the garden is a UK charity number.
And what sort of people did they have on the trust when they began to set it up?
Well, when they set it up, they had really, you might say, some of the elite of the UK. There were, people with titles. The Archbishop of Canterbury was very, very much a supporter of the possibility of purchasing this. A lot of outstanding clergymen and lawyers. So it was very, very much an Anglican-based set up at the beginning. In fact, probably most of the people on there were Anglicans, whereas today it's very international denominational setup, and many of us are from different walks of life within the Christian body.
Do you think there'll be a lot of bureaucracy trying to get everything set up in England, but also getting things set up here as well?
Yes, and that would have been the challenge then, very much so. And in fact, they actually went through a very difficult area where they'd had money promised, and then they tried to get a sale. The sale failed. They had to give all the money back to the people who had actually donated. And then just a year or so later, just a short period later, they actually had the possibility of purchasing again, and they went back to the people who donated that they'd given the money back to and said, can you give us it back again? And they did. And so that's how it came about. Yes.
Do you think these three ladies were very strong ladies?
Oh, yes, very much so. Very. In fact, Louisa Hope, she never got married. She was a woman in her own right. And of course the other two ladies, one became the treasurer for a number of years, so she served the garden very, very well there. And Charlotte Hussey, she became the first warden of the garden itself, so she was in charge here.
Now, other people have also played a significant part in the finding of this people land. Who's been that?
The one that began the journey, I suppose, is General Gordon, or he was one of the first, when he first of all discovered Calvary, Golgotha, just outside the northern walls of Jerusalem. And it was a little after that, maybe 20 or 30 years after, that the tomb was found. And the tomb was found by accident, really. I mean, the Greek owner was looking for water. He dug down and thought he'd found a water cistern. And he went to an eminent man at that time whose records here are well documented, and that was Conrad Schick. And he was asked to go in and look at this water cistern, as the farmer thought. And when he went in, he looked at it and he said, that's not a water cistern. He said, that's a tomb. And so he investigated. He said, it's a Jewish tomb. And so that was really the first identification of it as a tomb. This is before it was really excavated properly. And so that was the journey along the way. And it was a number of years after that people began to put more things together and see the significance of this area of Jerusalem, and maybe this being the alternative site to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And so all of these factors really played over probably about 35 years until in the end we've got a garden that's established and was known to be here at the time of Christ, next to the place of crucifixion, which is Golgotha, and in the garden this tomb that we're talking about, and the purchase of the land, of all those things to bring about the story of the garden.
Now, I've seen many like Agatha Christie stories, and you've seen the British go over to Egypt and do archaeology. Did British people come here to do archaeology on the tomb itself?
As far as we know, we think probably one of the ladies maybe did a little work on the excavation. But you're absolutely right. People did come to Israel from the UK, and they did work on various sites in excavation. And that would be part of the journey. I mean, General Gordon, he was himself a person that worked in that area. And also Conrad Schick was the same. He had worked on excavations as well. So all of those factors were part of the early story of the garden.
Yeah. And when did the thinking come that this could actually be the tomb of Christ?
I think it came about when it was formed as a Jewish tomb. In the context of the garden, I think we've got to think here of the wider picture. Probably the tomb on its own, without any of the other things around, would have been interesting but not significant. But the very fact that you'd got now a location that was being called Golgotha, making probably more sense in location. The fact there was an authentic garden, and in the garden there is this tomb that matches actually the biblical description. Because this tomb here, I know it's not exclusive or in that sense there are other tombs of the same shape, but where it is, it fits the biblical narrative perfectly. It has two chambers. The second chamber is to the right of the first. And that, of course, is exactly as the Bible describes it. When Mary went into the tomb, it says standing on the right-hand side where the body of Jesus would have been, with the angels who said, he's not here, he is risen. And so you actually get a carbon copy of the description in the Bible being seen in the tomb itself. And of course it's those things that picked up the significance, and also some of the symbols that were found on the outside of the tomb and the inside. The outside there was the symbol of the ship's anchor, which speaks about Christ, our anchor of the soul. And also inside there was the cross with the words on Jesus Christ, the Alpha and Omega. So you're looking at a number of things that actually bring the picture together, as it were. In isolation, they probably would have been lost. But the significance of them being in one place together, as the biblical story tells, gave significance.
And what sort of years did all this stuff take place?
You're looking now at 1894, and so you're coming to the understanding of about 120 years now, and this is when all this happened. So you're looking in roughly going back between 120, 150 years would be the period when the pieces of the jigsaw come together.
So these three ladies, basically, are the most important, pivotal part of this existence of the place here, isn't it?
They're very much an important part. I wouldn't say exclusive, because men were working in the background too, but the driving factor, I think you have to put down to Lucia and Charlotte. They were the driving factor that wanted to see this land purchased. And I think they're probably the ones who felt that God had spoken to them to do that.
It's an amazing story, isn't it?
It's a wonderful story. And I love it because I'm a guide here too, as well as being on the trust board. And it's a joy for me to bring people in, and particularly if I've got a group of ladies, to say, you know, you are important. And history here, if it wasn't for some of these women, with the men as well, of course, we wouldn't have this garden today. Yeah. They could see into the future. They could see that this would become a place of pilgrimage. And I think it's encouraging for us to take strength from strong and women and men, but those who have a strong faith and who are open to listen to the Lord.
And this is such a prime location here in Jerusalem as well. It must be worth millions now.
It is. I mean, occasionally people do try to come to us with offers, you know, and they're always, you know, large offers in that sense, but it's never on our agenda, never will be, because the significance of the garden is all important to us, and the message. And sometimes when people come round, we sometimes say, well, now you've seen the setting and you've walked the journey of our Lord from the cross to the garden to the tomb. All of that's good visually for your mind and when you read the Bible. But at the end of it, the most important thing is not the place, it's the person. And the person is alive, Jesus. You can know him. You can find him as your Lord and Saviour. And of course, that's the message of the garden.
Do many people find the Lord here?
Yes, many people do. We had a group come round the other week from Asia, and none of them were Christians. I think about 30 or 40 people. I wasn't here at the time, but I heard about it. Every one of them made a commitment to Christ. Wow. So it's lovely. And the other day I was taking 4 people round, and they just came to the door of the garden, and they said, we'd like to know more about this man Jesus. And they knew very little, and I took them round. I sat them down at the place of Calvary, and I just talked to them about the love of Jesus, and at the end I said, would you like to become a Christian? Would you like to follow Christ? They said we would. And so we prayed the sinner's prayer and just said, Lord, we're sorry that we failed you. We believe you are the creator, the God of this world that you made, and we want to come back to you, and we want our relationship to be restored. Please forgive us, come into our lives and become the Lord and Master of them. And it was lovely, the tears were rolling down their cheeks. Then I had another young man. We had some 20 people from China, and we'd had 10 inches of snow. Some of your people will remember it in just a couple of years ago. And I was out actually trying to make a way through the garden just in case someone came. And 4 o'clock in the morning, trying to make a way through 10 inches of snow. And I opened the doors at 8:30 in the morning, and there's 20 Chinese people outside. And I took them round the garden through this narrow path that we'd made. And when we came to the tomb, there was a young man there, and he'd been educated very well. His English was perfect. And he just said very loudly, like this, he said, and he paused, want to become a Christian, just like that. So I said, really? You want to become a Christian? He said, I do. So I said, do you know what it means to become a Christian? He said, I think so. So I just shared with him about the love of God and how that we can be changed and transformed, and that's why Jesus came, to set us free from our habits and bad habits of life, and sin can be removed and we can have a new start. He said, I want that. And so we prayed a simple prayer, and he became a Christian that day. And before they went, his mother and father came over. I didn't realize his mother and father were in the group. And I said, where are you going to go now then? Because Jerusalem is gridlocked. They said, we're going down to Jordan to baptize him. So these things happen all the time. People get healed here, and people restored back to God. You know, they may have lost their way. There was a lovely story one day when I was in the garden. I heard sort of an explosion of laughter and joy in a corner. And I went across, I said, something wonderful's happened, has it? And this lady was looking at me, and the tears were rolling down her cheeks. Her face was beaming. And she said, I've prayed for my husband that he would become a Christian for 35 years. And she said, he's just stood up in the communion service and said, I want to become a Christian. And so at that moment, life and transformation came to that man. God answered her prayer after 35 years.
And none of this would have taken place if it hadn't been for people of vision.
Exactly. And so it's like an oasis, you know, in the middle of noise and hustle and bustle. And people come in and they find tranquility, expression. And we have different locations in the garden where people can have services and communion. And some just come day in and day out. They sit quietly in the garden. The other day we opened our doors to the public at night. And we had the lovely Palestinian people round about who live here, because we're in a Palestinian dominated area. And probably over 2,000 came in over 3 days. Wow. And it was lovely to see them coming in and just enjoying the garden. Some had lived here all their life and never knew that the garden was here. Wow. And they came in for the first time, and they said, can we come back? Of course you can come back. It's the place for everyone.
Well, Paul, thank you for sharing.
That's great. It's been a joy, and may God bless your ministry.